Are the petitioners ready to call the next witness?
Yes, the petitioners call Section Chief Cushing.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cushing.
Good afternoon.
I will remind you, you're still under oath. Mr. Hayden?
Good afternoon, Mr. Section Chief.
Good afternoon.
Were you here this morning to hear the department's witness testimony?
Yes, sir, I was.
Did you hear the testimony concerning the distinction between TO15 SIM EPA testing and TO15 SIM CAM testing?
Yes, I was.
Is that distinction something that you were familiar with in your capacity as Section Chief?
No, I was not.
Some of the witnesses that testified this morning explained when they learned about that distinction. When, if prior to this morning, did you learn about the distinction between TO15 SIM EPA testing and TO15 SIM CAM testing?
Several days ago, well, subsequent to my May 16th meeting, Glenn Keith explained to me that the second one was an abbreviated list.
And I'm sorry, did you say subsequent to your May 16th meeting?
Subsequent to me finding out about data, I found out the difference between the test methods.
Okay. So do you have a copy of your June 4th affidavit in front of you?
Yes, I do.
And that identifies the earliest date that you knew about the department's request to Alpha Analytical for the additional data?
Yes, it does.
What you just described is something different. It's a conversation that you had with Mr. Keith about the distinction between the TO15 SIM EPA testing and the TO15 SIM CAM testing, correct?
Correct.
When did that conversation take place?
Sometime after May 16th.
And what result? How did that conversation come about?
As part of discussions on where the data was coming from and why the data was coming in late.
And what is your understanding of why the data was coming in late?
Because it was, my understanding is they didn't, it was requested and late in the process, and they just brought it in late. I don't have a deep understanding of it.
Did you have an understanding as to whether the broader list of volatile organic compounds was requested from Alpha Analytical when the initial task order was made back in February of 2018?
No, sir, I did not.
Earlier, we heard testimony from Mr. Keith about the progression of knowledge within the department concerning the new data from Alpha Analytical. Did you hear that testimony?
Yes, I did.
And essentially, the data was promised by Alpha Analytical on Wednesday, May 8th to be received on Friday, May 10th, correct?
I don't remember the specific dates he said, but yeah.
And then an initial set of data was received on Friday, May 10th, with the remaining data from Alpha Analytical received on Monday, May 13th.
Okay.
And then in Mr. Keith's affidavit, he attended a meeting on Monday, May 13th with attorneys Outman, Fallon, and Karam, as well as Glenn Pacheco and Sandra Barrett.
I recall him saying that.
When was the first time that you learned that meeting took place?
Probably the week after May 16th.
On Monday, May 13th, Mr. Keith also spoke with Stephen Coughlin, the meteorologist in the air planning branch, and to Tom Higgins, Chief of the Communications Branch within the Bureau of Air and Waste, about the Alpha Analytical reports?
I recall.
When did you first learn about those conversations?
Today.
On the morning of Tuesday, May 14th, Mr. Moran informed General Counsel Benjamin Erickson, Commissioner Suberg, and Deputy Commissioner Cooper that the additional Alpha Analytics data had been received. Did you hear that testimony this morning?
Yes.
When was the first time you learned of that communication?
Today.
As Section Chief, you signed off on the air quality plan approval, correct?
Correct.
And these continued proceedings are in connection with the air quality plan approval, correct?
My understanding is there's a connection with the HIA.
Right, but we're not here on an administrative appeal of the HIA, are we?
Correct.
So we're here for the air quality plan approval, correct?
Correct.
And your signature appears on the department's approval of the applicant's air quality plan approval application, correct?
Correct.
Would you expect as section chief who signed off on the air quality plan approval to be informed of these recent developments sooner than midday on May 16, 2019, following the completion of the morning session of the second day of testimony in this administrative proceeding?
I have no expectation of that.
Why not?
I find out when it's been released by, or I've been informed by management.
Well, you manage all of the people that were discussing this information as early as the end of April 2019, correct?
No, I do not manage that.
Okay, who do they report to?
The other people who were discussing, I can't answer, I do not know where each person answers to. I manage a small section in the Lakeville office.
Why are you signing off on the air quality plan approval and not these other people?
The air permitting section is managed out of the regional office.
Okay, so you don't supervise the people that are gathering the information for the department, correct?
Correct.
And you hold ultimate responsibility for signing off on the air quality plan approval for the department, correct?
Correct.
So you'd agree it's important for your office to have communication with everyone else involved in gathering information for the department?
Not necessarily during the processing and the preparation of the HIA, but subsequent review of the HIA recommendations, yes.
And I'm focused only on the developments of May of 2019.
Okay.
So we had a discovery by the department that additional data was available.
Okay.
You agree?
Yes.
And there was communication between a number of people. I believe with Mr. Keith, we counted up to 20 people, including yourself, that learned about this additional Alpha Analytics data, correct?
Correct.
And as the person who signed off on the air quality plan approval for the department, given the fact that we were in the middle of trial concerning the petitioner's appeal of that air quality plan approval, don't you think it would have been a good idea to let you know before Thursday, May 16th at midday that this issue had arisen?
Objection. These questions all go to what happened related to the HIA, not with respect to the plan approval.
No, I think he's asking about what happened in May during the course of this hearing with regard to the new data. If you could read the question back, please.
And as the person who signed off on the air quality plan approval for the department, given the fact that we were in the middle of trial concerning the petitioner's appeal of that air quality plan approval, don't you think it would have been a good idea to let you know before Thursday, May 16th of midday, that this issue had arisen?
Ideally.
The issue was with respect, I'm sorry, the issue was with respect to what happened during the HIA process, not during the plan approval process.
Well, I think the issue is at the point when you and the applicant and I learned that this new data existed, At that point, I certainly didn't know, and I don't know at 6 o'clock in the evening on the 16th whether the petitioners knew exactly what those data were. So I think that the question gets to, as the person who signed that permit, would it have been a good idea to let him, as the person who signed the permit, know that there were new data? Because I think at that point in time, during that hearing, the question was, do these data make a difference in this process? And I think that's where Mr. Hayden's question is going, not with regard to whether it would have changed the result of the HIA or impacted that process. So I'm going to allow the question, and you may answer.
Ideally, I would have liked to have known.
And how were you first informed of the additional alpha analytics data?
I was called into a meeting in Mr. Gary Moran's office during our lunch break from the Thursday proceedings.
Did you have any idea what the meeting was for walking into Mr. Moran's office?
No, I did not know.
And describe for us who was present for that meeting?
In addition to Mr. Moran, Mr. Keith, Mr. Pacheco, and I believe Attorney Dingle was present too.
This was just May 16th.
May 16th, correct?
Do you remember sitting here today whether Mr. Dingle was there or not?
Yes, he was.
And without asking you to disclose any communications that Mr. Dingle gave you, what was your education about the department's receipt of alpha analytical data during that meeting?
I was asked if the receipt of the new data should be modeled. Or if modeling should be done based on the receipt of new data.
Who asked that question?
Mr. Moran,
And what was your answer?
that emissions from the facility are modeled, not, and new data, new compounds would not be modeled.
They can be, correct?
These would be background. We modeled emissions.
But conceptually, background emissions taken from air samples collected at or near the proposed compressor station site can be modeled.
They would be, they wouldn't be input into the model, they'd be managed or added to the emission impact results in the end.
So they can be considered by the department.
They could be considered.
What was your reaction to your midday meeting with Mr. Moran, Mr. Keith, Mr. Pacheco, and Mr. Dingle when you learned that Alpha Analytical had produced new data to the department?
I didn't have a full grasp of what was going on at that moment.
Did you ask where the data came from?
Not until later.
Did you ask why we're having a meeting about new data received from Alpha Analytical during a lunch break of the trial appealing the air quality plan approval?
No.
You said a moment ago, not till later. When did you ask why we're receiving this additional Alpha Analytical data now?
That was a follow-up conversation I had with counsel
What date?
on the 16th.
Were you involved in any discussion amongst the department concerning how and when to notify the petitioners to this proceeding that the department had received additional data from Alpha Analytical?
Yes, I was.
And describe that conversation for us.
Well, counsel was present, but the timing was after the date, at the end of the conclusion of the proceedings on Thursday, minutes before or moments before the data was released.
I have a packet, Ms. Rothschild, of emails that were produced with the department's response to the original order to show cause. We looked earlier this morning at the supplemental production of last week. I have some questions for the witness If the witness doesn't have a copy of those emails in front of them, I did bring an extra copy.
I don't believe the witness has a copy, so if you could provide them with one.
Section Chief Cushing, have you seen this packet of emails before? Take your time to familiarize yourself with them.
So there's a couple of them dated on May 16th, dated the 5 o'clock hour, which I did see. I did see them following my return to the office on the following Monday. And I believe there's one dated the 16th that I did see.
There are a few emails in here that have you copied on them, correct?
Yes,
Had you seen the balance of the emails produced by the department in this packet before this afternoon?
I'm seeing them for the first time right now.
There's an email, and if you'd like to see it, just let me know, but I'll just read you one sentence of it. You're not copying on it.
Okay.
From Gary Moran to Tom Higgins and Glenn Keith, with CCs to Christine Kirby, Mike Dingle, and Jenny Altman, dated Monday, May 13, 2019 at 5:19 p.m. And the first sentence, authored by Gary Moran, states, prior to posting additional sampling data, could somebody call my cell? That was his cell phone. Were you aware of discussions within the department about posting additional sampling data prior to May 16 of 2019?
I don't recall having heard anything about that, no.
And there's a fair amount of correspondence on the alpha analytical data subject in this packet of emails, correct?
Correct.
And you end up getting looped into the discussion, it looks like immediately following the disclosure of the alpha analytical data to the petitioners, correct?
Based on what I could see in this, yes.
Would you have liked as section chief to have been copied on the correspondence preceding the disclosure of that alpha analytical data to the petitioners?
There was a request to make me, or a requirement to make me separate from the HIA process versus the permitting process. So it was, no, I would not have wanted to be.
Well, the disclosure made by the department on May 16 of 2019 was not made to an HIA distribution list. It was made to the Air Quality Plan Approval Appeal distribution list.
Correct.
So my question doesn't focus on the HIA, but in the context of this proceeding, where you are copied on the email correspondence following the disclosure of the alpha analytical data, would you as section chief who signed off on the air quality plan approval have liked to have been included on the email correspondence prior to that disclosure being made?
In the context of trying to have a full understanding of anything impacting these proceedings, yes.
And I believe you testified a few minutes ago that you were first asked about disclosure of the alpha analytical data shortly before the disclosure was made?
It was, first discussion on the matter was shortly before it was made.
And what was your position on that question before the decision to disclose the data was made?
That we should release it as soon as possible.
And that's in the interest of fairness and transparency to the petitioners in this proceeding, correct?
Correct.
You agree that in hindsight, the alpha analytical data should have been produced earlier to the petitioners in the interest of fairness and transparency?
Should have been produced as soon as practical, as soon as possible.
And the department first received that alpha analytical data on Friday, May 10th, with the completion of that alpha analytical data received on Monday, May 13th, correct?
Correct.
And there was no digestion of the alpha analytical data that the department was making in its disclosure to the petitioners, correct?
Correct.
So you would agree that as of Monday, May 13, 2019, the department would have been in a position to pass along the alpha analytical data to the petitioners in this proceeding?
Well, as Mr. Keith testified, we have standard practice of return of notifications and review.
And I'm not including the broader question of disclosing this information to the public. I'm talking about the petitioners who have appealed the issuance of the air quality plan approval, who, as of Monday, May 13, 2019, were preparing to begin trial 2 days later. Since the department was not digesting any of the Alpha Analytical data, it was in a position as of Monday to take the complete set of data received by Alpha Analytical and simply pass it along to the parties in this appeal, correct?
That's a very long question, sir. It's almost testimony, speculation.
Can you read the question back, please?
Okay, and I'm not including the broader question of disclosing this information to the public. I'm talking about the petitioners who have appealed the issuance of the air quality plan approval, who as of Monday, May 13th, 2019, were preparing to begin trial 2 days later. Since the department was not digesting any of the Alpha Analytical data, it was in a position as of Monday to take the complete set of data received by Alpha Analytical and simply pass it along to the parties in this appeal, correct?
I'm going to sustain the objection as to form, because that's how I understand it. If you're able to distill that to something more succinct with a question, we can go forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Section Chief, having received the complete report from Alpha Analytical as of May 13, 2019, you agree the department was in a position to pass along that information to the petitioners in this appeal as of Monday?
After we have the blessing of management, yes.
And what does the blessing of management require?
Procedurally, I don't know, but we would have to be informed by management and it can go out to public.
Who's man? Well, again, I want to be careful with the language we're using. We are not talking about a public disclosure. I'm not talking about putting the Alpha Analytical data on the department's website for public consumption. I'm talking about distributing this data set to the petitioners of this appeal during the week the trial is scheduled to commence, limiting the focus to that alone.
I think this question calls for a legal conclusion.
It's also very confusing because this is a public proceeding, so disclosure in this proceeding is disclosure to the public.
True, but I think the way that the data were released, they were released, here's a link to the DEP's website, and anyone can access it. And I think the issue for the petitioners and the issue for me was the department had this complete set of data 2 days before this process began. And I don't think it's any secret that my expectation is and was that the department had a duty to disclose that. I don't think that's a legal question. I think that's as an air permitter for the department, I think Mr. Cushing is qualified to answer that question.
Can we
Mr.
have,
Cushing, you may answer the question. Do you need it read back?
Could I have it read back, please?
Okay, well, again, I want to be careful with the language we're using. We are not talking about a public disclosure. I'm not talking about putting the Alpha Analytical data on the department's website for public consumption. I'm talking about distributing this data. Is that in the colloquy? I don't know that that was the question. What does the blessing of management require? And you want clarification read as well?
What was the
Well,
last
the question was,
before
what
the
does the
objection?
blessing of management require? And the answer was procedurally, I don't know, but we would have to be informed by management. It can go out to the public.
okay, so Ms. Rothschild, I asked the question in a limited fashion. Mr. Cushing testified that with the blessing of management, and I asked what that requires, and then his answer looped back in the public, which led to me trying to refocus the inquiry. So perhaps a new question.
I think a new question is appropriate.
Mr. Cushing, not focusing on a public disclosure on the department's website, within the context of this appeal of the air quality plan approval, what blessing from management is required to release the Alpha Analytical data to the petitioners of this appeal once the complete data set was received on Monday, May 13th?
Specifically where that it can't get released. Beyond that, I wasn't part of any of these conversations, so I can't really answer.
So, as section chief, you agree that with the complete data set in hand on Monday, May 13th, the department was in a position to release that data to the petitioners of this proceeding.
From my limited view, I don't know what other considerations and what kind of notifications needed to be made of the, Mr. Keith indicated there had to be certain notifications made to parties higher in this agency.
Well, let me draw your attention, sir, to the first email that I believe you were copied on, which, if you look toward the back of the packet of emails that you have, I don't have the number of pages from the back. We can count them if you'd like, but if you look at the pagination, there's an email chain that has the number 18, page number 18, at the bottom center. And if you could find that relatively 20 or so pages from the back of the packet, I'd like to look at that email.
Is there a date of the email you could also reference?
There is. It's Thursday, May 16, 2019, 5:53 p.m. from Lauren Karam to, among others, Section Chief Bishop.
Thank you.
I don't see the 18, but I see something from Lauren Karaman with, I don't specifically see my, oh, I see my name on it, yes. It says I just sent this link to council?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you recall receiving that email at that time?
As I sit here, no, but my name's on it.
Is there any reason to believe you didn't receive the email at that time?
I have no reason to believe otherwise.
So this appears to be the first time you're looped into this email thread. Is that fair?
Yes,
And the forwarded email that Attorney Karam is providing to you is an email to counsel in this proceeding advising that additional data has been posted on the Mass DEP website, and it provides the web link.
correct.
So this disclosure is providing information simultaneously to the petitioners in this proceeding and to the general public, correct?
Correct.
My question for you, Mr. Section Chief, is would you expect the department to disclose the alpha analytical data to the petitioners in this appeal prior to waiting 4 days before making a public disclosure as described in this May 16, 2019 email?
It's tough to say because I was not privy to the conversations on why it was being, why there was a delay. I don't know the rationale.
We've established earlier that the data was made available to the petitioners in the interest of fairness and transparency, correct?
Correct.
And given that the department had the alpha analytical data in hand as of Monday, May 13, 2019, you agree that it would have been more fair and more transparent for the department to produce the alpha analytical data to the petitioners in this proceeding on a date prior to Thursday, May 16, 2019.
I believe it should have been released in the most timely manner possible.
And we're talking about a few days here, so do you agree it should have been released by Tuesday, May 14, 2019?
Without an understanding of what this notification process requires and notifying the upper management, I can't say, but promptness would be important.
And again, we're not talking about public disclosure here. We're talking about this email distribution list, which is limited to counsel who have entered an appearance in this proceeding. Do you agree that these attorneys were entitled to receipt of this information as of Tuesday, May 14, 2019?
Not being a lawyer, I would say they should have been notified as promptly as possible.
Well, what does as promptly as possible mean to you when trial is 2 days away?
Objection.
What's the objection?
I don't understand that he's asked and answered the same question about 3 or 4 times. He's asked for his opinion about something that he's not even aware of. He wasn't aware of the process, so he doesn't know why it didn't happen differently.
Mr. Hayden?
He's using an undefined term, and his section chief who signed off on the air quality plan approval. I'm asking him what timely fashion means when you're talking about new information received by the department on a Monday with a Wednesday trial date, and yet the information was not shared with anyone until a public disclosure was made after the close of business on Thursday, May 16th.
Well, I think you're asking him, and he's testified he wasn't involved in the process, and it's sort of just his opinion as a person, a DEP employee. And I think he's answered. If you can you answer more precisely than as promptly as possible?
No, I can't. I do not know
So
what's
let's
about
move
it.
on to the objection is sustained.
If I could draw your attention to an email that was received shortly after the one we just looked at. It's from Dr. Baird to you, among others, dated Thursday, May 16 of 2019 at 6:36 p.m.
Could you repeat the date, please?
Yes, Thursday, May 16, 2019, 6:36 p.m. from Dr. Baird to a number of recipients, including yourself.
Should be on the next page.
I'm having trouble finding that particular one.
Is there a page number at the bottom of this one too?
16.
My copy is right at the next page after the one we were just looking at.
It actually has Mr. Fallon's name at the top.
I'm looking at a document from Dr. Baird, Thursday, May 16th at 6:36. Is that the one?
Yes, would you read the sentence that she wrote, please?
There is an order data summary as the first page to the file. Maybe it can be removed, Sandy.
Do you recall receiving that email?
Yes.
Did you learn what Dr. Baird was referring to?
No.
Did you hear Dr. Baird's testimony this morning about her review of this alpha analytical data on Tuesday, May 14th of 2019?
I heard that date mentioned.
Were you aware that the department's toxicologist was reviewing this data in connection with the air quality plan approval proceedings?
I was not aware.
Do you agree that the department's toxicologist's review of air sampling data is important to the department's consideration of the air quality plan approval application?
To the extent that we were required to conduct the HIA, yes.
And did you hear Dr. Baird's testimony this morning that she was unaware of the existence of the Rhode Island Department of Public Health air sampling data until she read the pre-filed direct testimony of Frank Singleton?
Yes.
Did that surprise you?
No.
Why not?
Because I didn't find out until later also.
You were unaware as section chief that there was Rhode Island Department of Public Health air sampling data until you read Mr. Singleton's testimony?
I don't recall specifically when I found out, or if that was the way I found out, but I was not aware of it right away.
Dr. Baird testified that that data was important to her review. Did you hear that testimony?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Section Chief, we spent a lot of time going over when you believe the additional alpha analytical data should have been produced to the petitioners in this action. I'm not going to rehash that line of inquiry, but I have a separate and related question. The department knew as of the end of April 2019 that it was possible to obtain additional data from Alpha Analytical that was not included with the original 40 volatile organic compound report received previously by the department. You aware of that?
Yes.
Do you agree that, separate and apart from producing the data itself, that once the department learned that it was possible to receive additional data from Alpha Analytical, it should have notified the petitioners to this proceeding to alert them of that development?
You mean the availability of additional data?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know legal obligation there. I can answer.
When you learned about the existence of the additional Alpha Analytical data during a midday meeting on May 16, 2019, while this administrative trial was proceeding, did you give consideration to disclosing to the attorneys who were present in the room during the afternoon of May 16, 2019, that additional Alpha Analytical data had been received by the department?
No.
Why not?
It's not my role to discuss these issues with the attorneys. I have attorneys to disclose that.
Are you in a position as section chief to ask your attorneys to make that disclosure?
We could have a conversation on the matter.
And did you have a conversation on the matter during the midday meeting on May 16, 2019?
I had a brief conversation subsequent to the meeting.
When was that?
Immediately after, if I recall.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
in context to the midday meeting versus the afternoon testimony received in this proceeding on May 16, 2019.
Okay, so the conversation I had was subsequent to the proceedings, the day's proceedings in the evening.
And who participated in that conversation?
My attorneys and Mr. Pacheco, Mr. Keith, and Dr. Bart.
In Mr. Keith's testimony, he talks about standard practice of the department to review environmental data before making the data public.
Yes,
Are you familiar with that practice of the department?
yes.
Is it written down anywhere?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And does the department have a practice applicable to receipt of air sampling data during the pendency of an administrative appeal of a decision to which that data relates?
I am unaware of any policy on that.
In Mr. Keith's testimony, also described a department practice for any high-profile matter to communicate with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs regarding information, correct?
Correct.
Are you familiar with that practice?
Yes.
Is it written down anywhere?
No.
Describe that practice for us.
I have, as a section chief, I have a responsibility to float up any issues to my supervisor or management, and it gets filtered up to the level necessary by whoever the management is.
Then who is management for you in connection with information obtained while reviewing an application for an air quality plan approval?
The management, in terms of the air plan approval.
Sure. In your prior answer, you said you have a responsibility to float up to management. And in the context of this proceeding, I'm asking who that management is.
In the context of this proceedings, we would have been dealing through Mr. Moran.
And is Mr. Moran at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs?
No, sir, he's in this building.
Then what escalates communication beyond Mr. Moran to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs?
I do not know the standard he uses to filter it up.
You testified a moment ago you were familiar with Mr. Keith's description of the department's practice for any high-profile matter to notify the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, correct? Are you saying you don't know the particulars of that practice?
I don't know the particulars. I do know most of the issues associated with this proceedings are floated up to the executive office.
And why this proceeding versus others?
There's a profile associated with it.
How long has the department been floating up information in connection with this proceeding to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs?
I have not been part of those email chains with conversations. I don't know when they began.
So is Section Chief, who signed off on the air quality plan approval in this matter, are you unaware of the department's communications with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs about this air quality plan approval application?
I know some of them have occurred. I have not been part of any of those conversations.
Why not?
My management felt that I did not need to participate.
And that's Mr. Moran?
Yes.
When was the first time you became aware that Mr. Moran was providing information about this air quality plan approval application to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs?
Objection. I think we're getting pretty far off.
I think so too, sustained. I don't think that gets at the issues in this appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Rothschild. I have no further questions.
Mr. Goldrosen, Mr. Miara.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Your signature appears on the airplane approval, correct?
Correct.
By affixing your signature to it, are you representing that the decision was made by you?
Correct.
And as part of the management oversight of you, is there someone who reviewed your decision before you executed it?
Yes, I worked with Mr. Chico. He managed the air modeling issues. This specific permit before it went out was reviewed by management.
Okay, that's what I'm interested in. When you say reviewed by management, who do you mean reviewed it?
Other than Mr. Keith, I do not know.
So at least Mr. Keith reviewed it.
Correct, before it went out.
So even though it's on your signature, it had his approval as well.
Objection. Again, we're going far afield from the data issue as opposed to the review of.
We are off the data issue, but we are getting to the issue that resulted in the petitioners not having a full and fair opportunity to cross-examine the department's witnesses. So I'm going to allow that, and with some limitations, but I'm going to give you a little leeway, Mr. Yates. Let's go forward.
Okay, so the question was, even though you made the decision, it came with the approval of Mr. Moran, is that correct?
As far as Mr. Moran, I don't know. Mr. Keith did
Sorry, I
provide,
meant Mr. Keith, yes.
he did provide comment on my thoughts, but he did not give me a yes or a no.
Okay, so we gave you comments, did you then incorporate those comments into your final decision?
I believe so.
Did any of those comments have to do with the quality of the data that had been received from Alpha Analytics?
No.
Okay, so you testified earlier in reference to Mr. Keith's testimony about the so-called standard practice that he had testified to earlier this morning. Do you recall that?
Yes.
In particular, we had asked him about the sentence of his May 22nd affidavit where he said it is a standard practice of Mass DEP to review environmental data before making the data public to confirm what the data are and what information it contains. Do you remember that?
I recall.
Okay. So, in light of that standard practice, what steps did you take to make sure that the data that was in your possession at the time you made the decision were in fact complete?
The data associated with the HIA, I relied upon the staff who prepared it.
You did not take any independent steps to verify that the data were complete?
I did not see the HIA till it was released to the public.
I'm not
Shortly
asking about the
after-
HIA, I'm asking about the data.
Data, underlying data,
The data that were received from Alpha Analytics. I believe the summer of 2018.
I do not recall having reviewed that data.
Okay, so I'm curious about the idea that this is a standard practice. Specifically, I can't seem to identify anybody who actually reviewed the data. So you're suggesting that you did not.
I did not.
Are you aware of anybody else who did?
Other than the Metropolitan Commission, I'm not aware.
Earlier today, I asked Mr. Keith about the role that the HIA played in the department's decision-making on the airplane approval. Present to that?
Yes, I was.
And I called his attention to a sentence that's in a joint motion submitted to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And that sentence says the department contends that it is necessary to obtain the results of this assessment before it can approve, condition, or deny Algonquin's air permit application. Did you believe that it was necessary to have the results of the assessment before you could approve, condition, or deny Algonquin's air permit application?
Yes, because the governor said we needed it. The governor said we needed the result of the HIA before any document could be issued.
So this was simply a procedural step, a box to check off. This as is work being done. You didn't need it to actually make your decision.
No, sir, that's not true. I was explicitly required to consider any recommendations contained therein.
Okay. And what about, when you say you were instructed to consider those recommendations, who instructed you?
The governor's office, the governor did.
Okay. And Mr. Keith made a distinction between considering those recommendations and relying on the HIA. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And did you rely on the HIA in making your decision?
I relied on some of the recommendations in there. I did review the document, but I did rely on them. So I did incorporate some recommendations into my approval.
I'm sorry, did you just say you didn't review the document?
I did review it, but I relied on recommendations and I incorporated a few of them into my approval.
Okay, so you're aware that Mr. Keith said that the department did not rely on it.
Specific wording, I don't recall. I read the conversation.
So, as you considered the HIA as part of your decision-making, do you believe it would have been within your authority to deny the air permit application based on information that's contained in the HIA?
I could speculate, but I don't know, I'm not sure. You know, had that situation arose, you know, we would have had further conversation on the matter.
So is it your testimony that, that if you wanted to deny the air plan approval based on the information that was contained in the HIA, you would have to get permission from someone else?
We would have to understand how it affected the permit and how it fit into our regulatory process. And if the information was relevant, we would act on it.
So it's possible.
I mean, I could
It could have been,
I could speculate, but the
Don't-
HIA.
please don't speculate.
Okay. Do you have a copy of, I'm not sure, does this joint motion have an exhibit number?
It does not, because it's not, it was not marked.
Okay, well, perhaps we better mark it.
Do you want it marked for ID?
Yes, please. Okay, and then I guess I would like to offer it as an exhibit in this proceeding.
And for what purpose is this being offered?
Well,
You asked some questions about it.
I'm asking questions about it, so it seems like it would be convenient for it to be an exhibit. But as you indicated when we were talking about it before, this document has been the subject of discussion in this proceeding in a number of instances. And you actually just made a request of the parties to make an amendment to this agreement.
True, it's actually not this document that is the operative document, it's the district court's order that makes reference to this, that references the parties' agreement.
Well, the district court, the DC Circuit's order, in fact, does not grant this motion.
I understand, but it's that document that is referencing the fact that the parties came to an agreement. So I think that if you have a copy of that, they can go in together. But this was, there was a subsequent document in the district court that specifically said I am not, the judge said I'm specifically not entering the order. But come back to me if you have a problem. Does that accurately reflect what Judge Casper did? Yes, please.
Okay.
31.
Okay, so do you have a copy now of exhibit, would you say 30 in front of you?
It's 30.
And if I should call your attention to paragraph 9 on page 6.
Yes, I read it.
Okay, so the sentence that I asked Mr. Keith about was the last sentence in paragraph 9. I wonder if you could read the first sentence in paragraph 9.
The department states that to ensure a full analysis of impacts of the proposed Weymouth compressor station is conducting a public health impacts assessment and air monitoring plan jointly with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health to document air quality at and around the proposed Weymouth compressor station, evaluate the proposed Weymouth compressor station's potential air quality impacts, and assess potential impacts on the health status of the surrounding community.
So is that a fair statement of what you believe you did in issuing the airplane approval?
I relied on, yes, it's so to the extent that I relied on the recommendations contained in there, yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Goldrosen,
I don't have any questions.
department have any redirect?
Did you have an opportunity to review the new alpha data? Mr. Keith, did you have an opportunity to review the new alpha data?
Yes, on the Monday following the proceedings.
And would it have changed your decision regarding the plan approval in any way?
No, sir,
Why not?
because we were modeling the emissions from the facility and compared against AAL, TELs, which are not based on our background.
Thank you.
Anything further from the petitioners?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Mioris, would you like these entered?
Yes,
30
please.
and 31, any objection?
No objection.
No objection.
Thank you.